This year was better than last year. Last year was better than the year before. The year before was better than the year before that. So this recovery experience is progressive. It gets better over any considerable period of time. And what a gift that is. Listen, if I could have just separated from alcohol and not drank myself to death, I would have done all this stuff. But there is a benefit, there is a rebuilding process that has gone on within me that has really brought me to peace.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Ooga shaka, ooga, ooga, ooga shaka. Ooga shaka, ooga, ooga, ooga shaka. Greetings from Studio AA deep in the heart of Texas. That was the voice of Mr. Chris S. that you heard at the beginning of this here episode number 289 of Sober Speak. And you, folks, will be hearing so much more from that gentleman in just a moment. But first things first, this here episode is brought to you by Adrian. By the way, Adrian's donation is a memory of his father, and I will read an email and listener feedback regarding Adrian's father. But anyway, it's brought to you by Adrian, Terry, Michelle, Brian, Marie, Kurt, Lou, Mary Lynn, Todd, Anonymous, and Audrey. What, you may ask, did these folks do? Terry and Michelle and Brian and Marie and Kurt and Lou and Mary Lynn and Todd and Anonymous and Audrey, well, they went to our little bitty website, clicked on the little yellow donate tab, and they made a contribution. So thank you so much, Terry and Michelle and Brian and Marie and Kurt and Lou and Mary Lynn and Todd and Anonymous and Audrey. This here episode is coming right out to Ewans. And I'm so looking forward to this here episode today. You know, I started it with that Ooga Shaka thing. That is the strangest lyrics in a song maybe that I have ever heard. Actually, maybe it was from last week's start when I read the word, not read. I just had it in my head, but I recited, that's what I did, recited the words, Mama say, Mama saw, Mama ku saw. And most of you will know that's from Michael Jackson's song. His song. I can't even remember the name of the song. But anyway, I just think it's interesting when people come up with lyrics like that. And I've been kind of into that with starting the episode here lately. Nonetheless, so when I was just saying that word, contribution, So I spent last week in Montreal for some work. And those of you who are around the world who may not know this, Montreal is in Quebec, which is in Canada. And they are I like that city, but those people don't know a lick of English. I'm just kidding, because it is a French first country. And I was trying out some of my French on them by saying, things after when I was paying for dinner, would you like a contribution? But they They did not think it was funny, or they just had no idea what I do, and they thought I was pretty much a jerk, which a lot of people on this program who listen to this podcast think anyway. But there was another thing that came up there for me. I was going to the restroom. And don't worry, I'm not going to get too graphic here, but I was going to the restroom, and on the door it said HOMMES for men. There was another word for women. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I figured out the little symbol that I was supposed to use that particular restroom nonetheless. So I asked the waitress if that is where the term homies comes from. And she said, what? I said, like my homie, my homeboy, is this where it comes from? It's like men. And she said, no, you don't even pronounce it that way. But I thought that I had discovered something, but I don't think I discovered anything whatsoever. But nonetheless, hey, listen, let's just get on to some of the episode and some listener feedback. So I am going to read a couple of pieces of feedback that we received here on the front of our episode today, because we have a lot of listener feedback on the back end and want to break it up a little bit. So I have a couple of pieces of feedback before we get into Mr. Chris S. Alice writes in, and Alice says, hi, John M. Greetings from Scotland. Well, hello, Alice. And then she says, AA found me 8 months ago, and I am currently on step 8. At this point, I don't know who I am anymore. I've not been sober since I was a teenager. I've got a lot of growing up to do for a 40-year-old. And then she puts a big laugh out loud face. It is now I have fully surrendered to God. It is now I am using prayer and meditation to build our relationship, and I ask for God to rebuild me. I have been looking at literature. I need all the help I can get out of my head. It is a bit pickled. I was having a browse through Audible. Oh, that sounds so Scottish, doesn't it? I was having a browse through Audible, searched for AA, and came across your podcast. I struggled to attend meetings due to work. I have a home group, and I do service once a week and more when I can. But I need to learn more, and I need to seek the love and support of my fellows where I try to honestly and fearlessly work this program. I thought listening to your podcast will hopefully help me to keep me close to AA, and I will learn a lot. I have been recommended to listening to Mark Houston, and lo and behold, he was on your list. I spent an amazing 1 hour and 38 minutes learning about being an agent of God. That was the title of the podcast. And she says, it has inspired me to listen to all the other podcasts. I plan to do this every day during my lunch break. I can't wait. It is refreshing to hear people from outside my wee city, Dundee in Scotland. That is so cool. When you say wee city like that, that takes me back to my childhood with my mom and my grandmother and my aunt and everybody else on my mom's side of the family would use that word wee. It is such a Scot word, and it just is so cool to hear you use that. But anyway, she says, we are an amazing group of AAs here and carry a wonderful message, but I have been known to do a geographical once or twice, although this time it's for good reasons. I'll keep my feet in Scotland. So that reminds me of when my grandmother used to sing, you take the high road and I'll take the low road and we'll get to Scotland before ya. And I can't really sing very well at all, but you get the idea. She used to sing that all the time. Anyway, she says, I'll keep my feet in Scotland, but my ears are now open to God's world and universe. I am so very grateful I stumbled across Sober Speak. I look forward to hitting play tomorrow. I am just at the start and feel blessed for what's to come. With thanks and gratitude, Alice M. Alice, so cool to hear from you from Scotland, and I'm glad that we can be part of your journey, and I'll look forward to, and maybe when you hit play tomorrow, you'll actually hear your feedback. Thank you for writing in. Catherine writes in and she says, "Hi, John. I'm so grateful for your podcast. Though not an alcoholic, I am a grateful recovering member of Al-Anon and ACA with an emotional sobriety date of 35 years this past February 1st. Well, good timing on writing in, Catherine. I am actually going to be featuring Miss Cassandra, who is a big part of our podcast, and she is in ACA, and we're going to be featuring her story here in a few weeks. So stay tuned, and you get to hear an ACA-er. I guess that's the term. You know what I'm saying. She says, I grew up in an alcoholic home, one where there is not one aspect of my life that the effects of alcohol had not affected. As the firstborn daughter of an alcoholic father and a drug-addicted mother, I grew up feeling flawed, ashamed, unworthy, and began suffering bouts of major depressive episodes and panic attack disorder around my late teens. 16 years later, after the birth of my third child, I discovered a book that changed my life, Healing the Child Within by Dr. Charles Whitfield, one of the founders of the adult child movement. I saw myself on every page and suddenly knew I was not alone. I started attending an ACOA meeting, found a sponsor, and started working the steps. The 12 steps have literally saved my life, with 3 exclamation points. During the hell of the pandemic, Zoom meetings and podcasts such as yours were what preserved my sanity and my serenity. Thank you, in big capital letters, for your service. It is so valuable for those of us on all sides of the recovery spectrum. With much gratitude, Catherine Z. in Hudson, Ohio. I wonder if that's where Kate Hudson is from. I doubt it. But anyway, thank you so much, Catherine, for writing in. I really appreciate it. God bless you. And you're right. It is valuable for us on all sides of the recovery spectrum. And I'm so glad once again that we can be a small part of your recovery. God bless you, Catherine, out there in Hudson, Ohio. And if you're listening out there and you happen to run across Catherine, give her a big hug for us. All right. All right, everybody. Now on to Mr. Chris S. And this here episode is called Recovery is Progressive. By the way, I started to abbreviate that, but then I realized it was RIP. So I decided maybe I better come up with another abbreviation. But nonetheless, Chris is from Blairstown, New Jersey. He discusses what is alcoholism, what makes one an alcoholic, why am I an alcoholic, and what separates me as a heavy drinker, the bondage of self. Talks about Joe and Charlie, who have been on this podcast many times, Joe Hawk, who has also been on this podcast as well, life as a circuit speaker, Chris has lived that, the hand of providence and how that has shown up in Chris's life, connection, unity, wholeness, and much, much more. Without further ado, by the way, I guess that is a French word as well, right? Adieu. Without further ado, I wonder what it means. I'll have to go look it up sometime. Without further ado, I present to you Mr. Chris S., and we will have plenty more of more listener feedback at the end of this here episode. Enjoy. Okay, everybody. So today we're sitting here with Mr. Chris S. Mr. Chris S., to start us off, please, I'm going to ask you to go ahead, introduce yourself, give your sobriety date if you choose, and tell people where you live in this land of ours, please.
I sure will. Thank you so much for having me on. My name is Chris. I'm a recovered member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is on or around December 28th, 1989. It was a very, very bleak and strange period. But I claimed the 28th as a sobriety day. And I live in a town called Blairstown, New Jersey, up by the Delaware Water Gap.
Blairstown, is that what it's called?
Yes.
And I noticed right as we were starting there that you are a Dunkin' Donuts coffee fan. You're drinking for some Dunkin' Donuts coffee, and I really, whenever I come up northeast, it's great. I love Dunkin' Donuts, and I love their coffee, and so I'm jealous that you have one at every single corner up in that area.
Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts is fine. Starbucks is good too if you like paying $13.95 for a small coffee. It's all good. Normally we just make our own, but we were out on the road before I sat down with you.
Whenever I'm up in Boston, and I've been up there many, many times, it's, as you probably know, it's how they give directions, right? It's like you go down to the Dunkin' Donuts, you take a right. You go down to the next Dunkin' Donuts, you take a left. And anyway, it's good coffee. All right, so we, by the way, I was referred to you through Marty. You and Marty C are good friends.
Marty's one of my best friends. I love him. He's great.
He's a great guy.
Canadian. My absolute favorite Canadian.
He's been on. I don't know if you know this, but he's been on the podcast. Gosh, I would imagine like 7-8 times, something like that. And so he's kind of taken a slow walk through the steps. I'm assuming then you probably know Charlie and all that.
Charlie, he's my favorite Texan.
Yeah. Well, wait a sec. Can I be your second favorite Texan?
Charlie and Katie are just they're forces of nature is the best way I can describe them. The planet is very lucky to have them amongst the inhabitants. That's the best way I can put it.
Yep, they sure are. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch. So this is your first time on Sober Speak. And a lot of times we kind of go through, at least people coming on the first time is their story. And I think what we're going to do today is kind of combine your story with finding recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous and what the nuances around that. So first of all, why don't you just kind of start where you want to start, Chris, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. First and foremost, I'm an alcoholic. Now, the strange thing was when I was dying of alcoholism, I really didn't understand alcoholism. I didn't really know what it was. I thought alcoholism was drinking too much. But there's a lot of people that drink too much that are not alcoholic. I thought I was an alcoholic because I got in a lot of trouble drinking. And believe me, there's a lot of people that get in a lot of trouble drinking who are not alcoholic. So showing up, I went to treatment a couple of times. 19 years I drank, and you could just plot the trajectory of the downhill slide on an Excel chart. Every year there were worse consequences. My physical health was getting worse. My drunken blackouts were getting low. It was just an absolute mess. But here's the thing. I discovered what alcoholism was after I was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous for a while. And I think it's really, really important to understand what alcoholism is. Now, I can tell you my story, and I can tell you all the car crashes and the divorces and the coming to in jail. I could tell you all those stories, right? But I think alcoholism, those are symptoms of alcoholism. All that craziness that happens. Those are symptoms and consequences of, you get drunk, you do drunk stuff. And a lot of that stuff was drunk stuff. But I show up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I get exposed to some people who had a real working knowledge of the information in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. They were just really clear on all the material in that book. and they had become very, very good at transmitting, their personal experience and the information in that book to other people in an understandable way. And I started to get that I was alcoholic. Now, why was I alcoholic? Well, there's two or three things that all alcoholics have in common. One of them is every single time I started drinking, if the alcohol remained available and I could drink it, I kept drinking it every single time. Now, there was a lot of people that I partied with that would have two or three beers, or, hey, I've had enough. I'm going to be driving, or, I got to work tomorrow. But if the alcohol was available and I could drink it, I would continue to drink it until I was unconscious. And that was from day one. That was from when I was 13 years old. So that's what the book Alcoholics Anonymous describes as the phenomenon of craving or the allergy to alcohol. Now, what's my personal experience with that? Well, I recognized that from a young age. My first couple of drunks were on hard liquor, and I said, whoa, let's slow this thing down, and I started to drink some of the things that 13-year-olds were drinking back then, like, Boone's Farm apple wine and, schnapps, all that.
Yeah.
And then I became a beer drinker because it just seemed like I could pace beer better than I could pace the whiskey. So right out of the gate, I started to make efforts to control this phenomenon of craving, to try to outwit it, to use drugs, to try to baffle that or slow that down so that I could actually go out to a party and not pass out at 7:00 at night. So there was efforts right out of the gate to try to control my drinking. That's not necessarily the experience of non-alcoholics, right? The other thing that I recognized that was shared with me by these folks who had real working knowledge of the book was the obsession of the mind, and that was a much harder lift for me. Now, how it's described in our book is it's an inability to stay separated from alcohol. We don't have, we can't use our willpower to stay away from liquor. And strange things happen, like strange mental blank spots, subtle forms of insanity happen prior to me putting alcohol in my body. Because by the time I tried to quit, I knew that putting alcohol in my body was the craziest thing I could do. I knew it, but I would put it in anyway. Now this was the baffling part of alcoholism for me, because I knew I wouldn't quit drinking, but I didn't know I couldn't quit drinking. So wouldn't and couldn't are two completely different things. I lacked the power to stay separated from alcohol. And I only discovered that after I was sober for a while in Alcoholics Anonymous. There was enough power in the fellowship and all the activity and everything for me to be spiritually sound enough to remain separated from alcohol. But I tried to quit drinking, and this is what the obsession of the mind would look like for me. I would come to in the morning wearing the clothes I had passed out in the night before. I'd stagger up, I'd stagger into the bathroom because it's a working day. I've got to be at work at 7:30 or something. I'd throw some water on my face, do some vomiting calisthenics, stagger out to my $100 car and go off to my terrible job. And the whole time I am saying, I'm never going to do this again. I'm never going to do this again. I never want to feel like this. I know I have said this 398 times before, but there's something different about today. I really mean it today. I really mean it. Today, I mean it. And here's the crazy thing. If you would put a lie detector on me and say, Chris, you giving up alcohol for good and for all today? I would have said yes at 8:00 in the morning. And the needle would have gone to true, because I meant it. I meant it with every fiber of my being. But here's what would happen. I'd get half a sandwich down around lunchtime. Quitting time is 4:30, right? So I'd get rehydrated. I'd drink like a half a gallon of grape drink or something to get rehydrated. And I would start to feel a little bit human by about 3:00. And I'd start to say to myself, that decision to quit drinking for good and for all, that might be an overreaction. I think I overreacted. And by the time it's quitting time, by the time it's 4:30, I'm like, that decision to quit drinking is going to have to be modified. I'm going to stop at the liquor store on the way home. I'm going to buy a bottle and I'm changing my mind. I'm changing my mind about this quitting drinking. Now, the insanity of alcoholism is not me quitting at 7:00 in the morning for the rest of my life. That's the most sane and sound decision I can make. That is in my best interest. The insane part is that I actually believe I'm changing my mind. I don't understand the true nature of powerlessness. I don't understand. I don't have sufficient defense against the first drink. That's what makes me powerless. That's what I'm admitting to in the first step. And I didn't get that until I was put in front of some people who really understood this. Now, there's a dash, right? We admitted that we're powerless over alcohol. Dash that our lives have become unmanageable. I was educated on that as well. I thought, okay, I'll admit my life is unmanageable when I drink. Okay. Because when I drink, I get into divorces, I get DUIs, I crash cars, I get into fights, I do crazy, stupid, weird things, that I'm embarrassed about the next day. Okay, my life is unmanageable. But that's external drunk stuff, unmanageability. The people that were working through the big with me said, Chris, it's worse than that. It's worse than that. The unmanageability is a spiritual unmanageability. It's an emotional unmanageability. And what it looks like is on a good day, you're going to be restless, irritable, and discontented. You ever feel restless, irritable, and discontented? Like,
I have.
Why are these people driving so slow? 40-mile-an-hour zone. So I'm like restless, irritable, but discontented. In between drinking, this is sober and supposedly sound of mind. Restless, irritable, and discontented. That's a good day. A normal day is prey to misery, depression, anxiety, self-centered fear, guilt, shame, remorse. It's that's a normal day for me. I am trapped in what the book calls the bondage of self. The self-imposed crisis that I cannot postpone or evade. And it's emotional and it's spiritual. And on a bad day, it's the hideous four horsemen: terror, frustration, bewilderment, despair, and pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Where I think about, I have suicidal ideation. I don't want to live this way anymore. And that's in a sober state of mind. I'm trying to blame alcohol on everything. And what I should be blaming on everything is alcoholism, because it's a much bigger piece of the pie. So that's basically my story, and that's basically how I identify as an alcoholic, and why I'm in the right place, why you and I are talking right now.
That makes sense. So you mentioned something before we started about, I guess, basically how people find recovery while they are actually in Alcoholics Anonymous. I am assuming that you had some sort of experience with that. Would you like to walk through that?
One of the saddest things I see today is I see people who, may be alcoholic, may not be alcoholic, but they've got an alcohol problem, and alcohol is causing a huge problem in their life, and they come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and they participate in the fellowship. All right, I'm going to meetings. Now, what I learned was that if you're really alcoholic, there is a specific solution that's laid out in the book Alcoholics Anonymous for alcoholism. It's a beautiful recovery program that is a solution to alcoholism. And a solution to alcoholism is not going to meetings and not drinking. That's not a solution to alcoholism. That's a solution to remain abstinent, to be abstinent. But if you're really an alcoholic, remaining abstinent is 5% of what's available. So my personal story is, and how I found recovery in the fellowship was, I was going to meetings. I knew I was in real trouble. I had gone to treatment a couple of times. It was a terrible Christmas of 1989. Okay. I came out of a blackout. I'd rather die than go through something like that again, a bottom. I just wished to dig myself no deeper. And I showed up in the fellowship and I did not understand. I really thought that I was treating my alcoholism by going to the fellowship. And listen, going to the fellowship is a good thing. Going to meetings I'm not knocking meetings. I'm just saying, if you stop there, it's really bad luck. Now, I didn't know this. I'm going to a ton of meetings. People are patting me on the head saying, "Oh, Chris, I see you everywhere, man. You're doing great," But inside I was nuts. I was the type of guy who I'd sit in a discussion meeting and I'd be sitting there and all of a sudden he'd raise his hand. You probably know exactly who I'm talking about. I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh no, he raised his hand. Oh my God, he raised his hand. Don't call on him. Don't call him. He's a blowhard. You're going to have to listen to the blowhard for 5 minutes, Oh, I can't stand it. Oh, now he's grateful. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Cockles of my heart that he's grateful. I think I'll go outside and slash all 4 of his tires and have a meeting with him because I want to see how that gratitude holds up, Finally, he's done. And I don't want you to know what's going on in my head. So I'm sitting there like this, like, well, thanks for sharing. Acting like I'm not completely insane. Now that's me stark raving sober. And I don't know any better. And how do you know what you don't know? I don't know any better. So I get exposed to these people who start to explain a recovery program. How it happened for me was somebody handed me a set of 90-minute Joe and Charlie tapes, right? They're like eight 90-minute tapes, Joe and Charlie. I listened to that and it just infuriated me because maybe that's how they do AA in Arkansas. In New Jersey, we share, And so I shoved the tapes aside. I hit a sober bottom, a jumping off point. What you can call it, whatever you want, but it was basically an emotional breakdown, and I knew that I was going to relapse. I was going to kill myself. Something. It was emotional pain I couldn't stand, and so I went back and I grabbed those tapes because they spoke with authority. They spoke like they actually knew what they were talking about. And a lot of the information in those tapes haunted me. So I go back to them, I start listening to them, and I actually start going through the steps by myself with these tapes and an open book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's my beginning of my recovery. No one was taking anybody through the steps in New Jersey in 1990. Okay. You'd walk into a meeting and you'd raise your hand and say, I'm confused about this 4-step. How do you do a 4-step? And some old timer would go, kid, you do a 4-step with a pencil. And then everybody'd start laughing. I mean, that's the kind of help you would get, like in 1990. So these tapes were seminal. They were transformational. They were revelatory for me. Very soon after going through those Joe and Charlie tapes, I found a set of tapes by Joe Hawk called the Joe Hawk Salvation Army tapes, and this took it to a whole new level. Right? I mean, what these tapes were good at was explaining the problem in detail, explaining the solution and the step in detail, explaining how to do the step specifically, and then explaining what kind of a benefit, what kind of a result are you personally going to have by taking that step. And this just took me to a new level. And then by the mid 90s, Joe Hawk and Mark Houston were going around the country doing workshops. And I got every single one of those workshops. And I just started listening to them all the time. And, a lot of it was just educational. Like I was educating myself in this step process. But what really helped me personally was when I actually took the action to do the steps. So I got an opportunity later on. I had about 10 years sober. I got an opportunity to go through the steps with Joe Hawk. He'd come to New Jersey to do a retreat, and I got to know him, and we became friends. And I asked him to take me through the steps, and that's what happened. So I see the 12 steps as the perfect solution to alcoholism. All right. And what I mean by that is the emotional, spiritual, mental part of alcoholism. I've already separated from alcohol. Now, my problem becomes an emotional and mental illness after I separate from alcohol. And that's the part that the 12 steps treat. They treat that emotional and spiritual illness that truly is what alcoholism is.
So I was thinking there while you were sharing, and I know you've seen this many times over. I get to see it, and there's somebody, in fact, in our group, David G, who says one of the forms of sanity is coming to a 12-step program, coming on a consistent basis, sitting in meetings all the time, and not doing the 12 steps. And so what is it you think, why do people do that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
All right. I want to understand calculus. It's going to be very, very important for my business, for me to personally understand calculus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the calculus classroom. I'm not going to bring a book, not going to do any of the problems, but I'm going to hang out in the calculus classroom. I'm just going to hang out there. And afterward, we're going to go for coffee after the calculus class. And, I'll get a calculus sponsor, and, I'll make coffee for the calculus group. I'll even start dating people that I meet in the calculus course. But I'm not going to do any of the problems or learn any of the math. Would I be crazy? I'd at least be wasting my time, right? But that's what happens. That's what happens in AA groups all the time. After 33 years of tons and tons of meetings, I would say maybe 20% of the people in the groups actually take the steps. Probably another 40% think they have had a step experience because they agree with the steps in theory and they've gone to a lot of step meetings. And another 30% don't believe that the steps are going to be necessary in their case. So they're not going to do them. They're fine with the fellowship. That's really what's going on out there in the fellowship. And, our success rate is directly proportional to all that nonsense. In the early days, they took you through the steps before they brought you to meetings. They didn't want you showing up at meetings if you didn't mean business. Yeah. So it changed. It changed, and the fellowship, the barn doors of the fellowship opened wide enough for anybody to come in and do anything they wanted to do. And I understand that. I think you need to cast a wide net, but there are people who are in real trouble, and they are not going to survive without a personality change at depth and a spiritual awakening. They're just not gonna. And we see them all the time. We see the people that don't make it all the time. So look, it would be like going to the airport and watching all the planes take off day after day after day, and talking about flying and reading books about flying, and hanging out with other people that like flying, but you've never flown. You know what I mean? I don't want to sit in the terminal anymore. It would be like you need an operation. You need an operation. You have to have an operation to survive, right? So you go to the waiting room in the operation, the doctor's waiting room, and you hang out and you drink coffee and you meet people, but you never go in to have the operation. That's the experience of a lot of people today. And you bring that to their attention, and they'll usually get really mad or think that you're extreme or whatever. But Alcoholics Anonymous is a 12-step program with a support fellowship. That's what it is. It's what it's supposed to be.
Right. Okay, so so I think you talked about, I'm making sure I got this right. So you came into your first meetings in, was it 85? And then you got sober in 89. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. By the way, I also got sober in 1989 by the grace of God. So, so we're the class of 89. And so when you came in, and then you got sober this last time in 89, when did that kind of shift take place? Was it sometime between 85, 89, or sometime after you actually got into the program, or after you sobered up?
All recovery is evolutionary. And the evolution of it was, I was so beat up that I was willing to get a sponsor on day 2 of my return back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he gave me one instruction. He said, I want to see you at a meeting every single night. And I did that. For my first 8 years, I went to a meeting every single night. I would not, it was like dialysis for me, or something. I just wasn't going to miss it. And I think what that did is that cemented me in the fellowship, where I could get healthy enough to come to terms with my alcoholism and come to terms with the recovery process for alcoholism, and start to participate in that. So it wasn't like a light switch going off. It was more of like an evolution. I credit God for all this. I was way too sick to be able to figure any of this out. I was way too obstinate and judgmental and nonconformist to join a group. There were so many things that were going against me, but there was a deep desire within me that was born of desperation. I made an attempt to do bodily harm to people I really cared about in my last drunk, and that shot me into a new level of desperation and willingness. I couldn't be the type of person that could hurt the people I cared about. So I gave it a little bit of extra effort. It was they say you can't scare an alcoholic. Well, you can't scare an alcoholic about their own death, but you can scare them about their own life. You could survive for a long time, and it could keep getting worse. That's scary for an alcoholic, and that's where I was.
So I always like to ask people who have come on here, because I always wonder about it when I've been at conferences and stuff, because you are affectionately known as a circuit speaker, right? I know you've been around a lot, talking a lot of, and what can kind of walk me through the upsides and downsides to that, and what you've learned over the years, and what your motivation was like on the beginning, what maybe it is now, and how that has changed throughout your sobriety.
A couple of things about that. I like to refer to myself as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous who occasionally gets asked to participate in certain events.
I understand.
But how that happens is, the healthy way for that to happen is invitationally. you get invited to do it. I mean, it's almost terrible luck to try to become somebody that speaks at conventions or whatever, to make it a point of and drive toward that. That's really bad luck because it's a dangerous thing. When you get behind a microphone and there's large crowds, and this happens a lot, it goes contrary to a healthy ego. Because, people are clapping and then there's a thank you line. Oh, you've been so much help to me over the years, blah, blah. And if you listen to that, what can happen is that can be an anti-humility potion, and it can become very, very dangerous. I've seen two things with non-healthy circuit speakers. One of them is relapse, and that happens a lot more than you think with the convention speakers. And the other is, becoming just as annoying and as conceited as someone can be without drinking. Those are two things that can happen. A couple of the people that you mentioned earlier on in the meeting are people who've escaped that and have found a way to remain right size while doing something that's very non-right size. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I had never the answer that you gave regarding some sort of spin on it, like in other words, you said it's invitationally centered. I love that. You can't force feed it, right? And you can't, that can't be your goal in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if it is, it's probably going to end up in a bad way, if you will.
I agree.
All right, so let's talk then a little bit about your journey throughout Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, I know that it's a long time, right? It's 33 years. And what stands out to you during this time about, finding recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous? Were there any particular, I know you said it's evolutionary, but were there any particular turning points or places that made you, where you had to kind of change on a dime, if you will?
It was a slow progression. In the book Alcoholics Anonymous says some of us have a spiritual experience of the educational variety that happens slowly over the course of time. And, that's really what I had, because slowly over the course of time, I went through the 12 steps. You can have a sudden and profound spiritual experience if you suddenly and profoundly go through the steps. But I'd say if there's any one thing that was transformational for me, it was my experience with Joe Hawk. For about a 8-month period of time, he moved me through some steps at a depth and a level that I had not done. Remember, I was working a program on my own. The sponsors weren't taking me through the steps. None of them did that, in the 90s, not in my area. So I'd kind of, through tapes and, my own efforts, I had gone through. Well, now I was under the care and direction of somebody who was a spiritual master of this stuff. And in that 6-month period of time, I look back and my life just completely changed. Where I was working, who I was with, the friends that I had, the places that I lived, all these things shifted around that time, in that 1 year. I think it was like 2000 to 2001. That was a defining period of time for me. I think it certainly cemented me into the things that I do today. Joe was one of the best carriers of the message. I wanted to emulate that, with sponsees or whatever. And so that stayed with me. And it's funny. I'm a quitter. You got to understand, I'm a quitter. I joined the Boy Scouts. I went on one camping trip. I took guitar lessons. I took 2 lessons and stole a guitar. I joined the rest of the team. I went to 1 practice. You know what I mean? I went to college. I got 8 credits. I mean, I could give you 1,000 examples of how I quit, but I didn't quit this. And I have to look for the hand of providence. I have to look at the hand of providence for that, because this is just something I haven't quit.
Okay, so if you were to kind of, you have a lot of different folks listening right now who are spread throughout many different countries, right? We have over 200 different countries that are listening. And so if you were to kind of wrap this up, like sharing something from your experience, strength, and hope in terms of Alcoholics Anonymous, keep in mind you have a lot of people that are kind of sober curious, if you will. They maybe they don't know exactly what this Alcoholics Anonymous thing is, but why don't you just kind of share to kind of wrap it up from your experience, strength, and hope there?
What I believe alcoholism is it's a toxic experience of self-consciousness. That's what I think it is. We throw alcohol on it because being that self-conscious is just too painful. And a lot of people in other fellowships and, with other obsessive compulsive disorders understand what that really is. And I believe the 12-step journey is a journey from that toxic experience of self-consciousness to an experience of consciousness and connection and unity with the divine, which is what's missing. So when I look at alcoholics, when I look at drug addicts, they have a missing piece. And that piece, you can call it a God-shaped hole, you can call it whatever you want. But there's something that is in disunity with them. They're not connected. They're not whole with a W. And what the 12 steps do is they bring about that connection, that unity, and that wholeness. And the last message I would like to leave you and whoever is listening with is this. This year was better than last year. Last year was better than the year before. The year before was better than the year before that. So this recovery experience is progressive. It gets better over any considerable period of time. And what a gift that is. Listen, if I could have just separated from alcohol and not drank myself to death, I would have done all this stuff. Yeah. But there is a benefit, there is a rebuilding process that has gone on within me that has really brought me to peace. And I believe this whole journey is moving away from self-consciousness, self-seeking, selfishness, toward connection with the divine, understanding my specific powerlessness and seeking power. And it's a great way of life. If you're unsure, give the steps a shot. You got nothing to lose. You got nothing to lose. You're going to be sure that they're stupid and they're not going to work for you, but give them a shot. Give them a shot anyway.
What's the old line we always hear around here? We'll refund your misery, no problem.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Chris S. from New Jersey. This has been, I've really enjoyed spending time with you. I'm going to read from page 164 here to wrap us up. It says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and Chris S., as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you. Until then, once again, Chris, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Chris S. I would love to hear from you all regarding Chris S. or any of the other speakers we have. Send me an email at john, at soberspeak.com. Would love to hear from you. And thank you, Chris S. Once again, we will be having Chris S. on some additional episodes coming up here in the near future. You can look forward to that. And I don't know, probably a month, 2 months, something like that out. We're going to have Chris on again. And I'm looking forward to featuring him one more time, at least, probably more. You know, I'm pausing here because I'm looking out my window. We apparently have a tornado warning, and I am up on the second floor. So, you know, this would be interesting. I may make it through listener feedback. I may not. But it would be an interesting way to go because, you know, maybe John M., was recording Sober Speak, and he was whisked. I like that word. Whisked away by a tornado. But hopefully that will not happen. You know, I've always wanted to be one of those guys that, I shouldn't say always wanted to be. This is not like a lifelong dream. But I should say I would not mind this. You know, you're in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and you're sharing. Maybe even not sharing, maybe just sitting there. Or maybe, let's just say you were sharing about being happy, joyous, and free, and all of a sudden you just keel over and that's the end of it. Wouldn't be a bad way to go, right? It happens sudden. So any of my friends who are listening to this and you're thinking about like assassinating me during the meeting, please don't do that. I would want to die of natural causes. All right. Anyway, now on to a little bit of a listener feedback. Ken writes in, and Ken says, "Hi, John. I was really lost for a long time. I tried AA a few times, but it never really sunk in for me. I'm not lost anymore. Thank you, guys." So I'm not real sure what prompted that. My guess is what he meant is that he is able to grasp the program more, and it makes more sense to him, and he's gotten a little traction in the program. And so, Kim B., thank you so much for writing in. We're very happy to hear from you, and thanks for listening. Todd writes in, he says, "Hi, John. I am 46 years old with 9 days of sobriety." Good for you, Todd. "I'm in California, and I found the podcast while searching for content of similarities." Ooh, that's very well phrased. I like that, Todd. He says, "I am taking a sauna daily and happy to play your podcast when I can't make a different type of meeting." Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't Todd. It is Tobin. My apologies. Tobin wrote in. Tobin R. So Tobin, I am so glad to hear that you are listening to us while you're taking a date. Well, first of all, I'm excited for you on your 9 days of sobriety. Hopefully it's more by the time this actually comes out. But it's very cool, I think, that you're listening to us while you're in the sauna. Now, I'm trying to picture this. It gets pretty hot in a sauna. I'm trying to think if you're actually playing it like on a speaker of some sort, or you have the little pods in your ears. And if you are listening on the pods, if those things are slipping out of your ears because it's becoming a little, too warm in there and the sweat and stuff like that. But nonetheless, I always love to hear what people are doing when they're actually listening to the pod. I'm so glad you shared that with me. Enjoy your sauna. Congratulations on the 9 days of sobriety. And it was so good to hear from you. Tobin, not Todd. Adrian writes in, and this is so I mentioned on the beginning of this episode that Adrian had made a contribution in honor of his father, and he wrote this. He says, "Hey, hi, John. My father was the only person who believed in me, and he was sure that one day my life will be okay. He passed away some years ago, and sometimes I'm so sad because he didn't have the time to see me sober. He was not even my blood father, but he loved me as a child. He was such a great father. All my life, I wanted to be like him, but obviously, I successfully failed. Brother John, you make such a good thing with the podcast. It's my second addiction. Every single night, I listen to 1 or 2 episodes. Some weeks, I restart from the beginning. Thank you so much for your service, and God bless you, brother. Just between me and you, I listen to other recovery podcasts, but you are the best, my friend. And your bilingual Spanish/French and we've had a bit of that here on this show, on this episode, is killing me. It's a big smiley face. For me, it's a big help. By the way, Ted Lasso has a new season. And he's saying that because I've mentioned him. You can tell the people who actually listen to me on the podcast. And I mentioned that I was watching Ted Lasso. It's the only series I've ever watched on, like one of the Netflix thing or the streaming series or whatever. And I'm going to have to get started on that, Mr. Adrian. Thank you for letting me know. And then he says, ooh, Campanero, all the best from a sober Adrian, smiley face. And so I think what he's doing is calling me Campanero, and it sounds like companion. And my guess is it is a affectionate or a regarding kind of way of talking to somebody. But thank you, Adrian. I all the best to you as well. Who knows? It could mean go fly a kite or go pound sand or you're a jerk or whatever. But I got a feeling that Campanero is a good word that you want to hear from a brother in sobriety. Appreciate it, Adrian. Mary writes in, and this one's called Sober Meditations, and I'm just wondering if other people are wondering the same thing. She says, hello, John. My name is Mary B. I'm a recovered alcoholic with 4 years of sobriety. I live in Tempe, Arizona, and my home group is Bloopers. Oh, I like that. Bloopers. That sounds like a good name that is a good name for a group. She says, I just listened to your podcast, and I heard Buddy C., and I'm very interested in information about his sober meditation tapes. How would I look for those on my iPhone? Love your podcast. I think I've listened to every one of them that is out so far. Keep up the fighting. Keep fighting the good fights on the front lines of recovery. Thank you, Mary B, and her telephone number. So I got her in touch with Buddy, and Buddy was able to tell her how to make sure she found the sober meditation app. And so just so if you're not aware of this, Buddy C, who's been on the podcast many times, has an app, and it's called Sober Meditations, and it's basically him and some quiet time, and I listen to him all the time, and what you can do is listen to him in either 5-minute, 10-minute, or 20-minute segments. There's some about the first step, the second step, all the various steps and the various topics such as letting go, and there's a lot of information out there. And so if you're looking for something to help you with meditation, I highly recommend it. It's a very good app. Jerry writes in, and Jerry says, hi, John. I am a newcomer to the podcast, and I am fortunate that a friend of mine told me about it. I was just listening to your podcast with Casey, talking about KCW. We did an episode about prayer and meditation, and I wanted to share with you something I learned about prayer and meditation that simplified it for me. Prayer and meditation he's talking about enough to do it immediately. Think of prayer as a form of communication, prayer being you talking to God of your own understanding, and meditation as listening to his answers. Thank you, sir. You are awesome. Providing meeting between meetings. I have a 25-mile commute from home to work, and I live 6 miles from a paved road and another 10 miles from a town closest to me. You and your podcast keep me company to and from work at least 5 days a week. Thank you again, Jerry. Well, Jerry, thank you for your insights on prayer and meditation. Thank you for listening to us, and I'm glad we can be a part of your journey, my friend. I appreciate it. Mike writes in, and Mike says, your story. He says, John, I appreciate all you do, and I've been listening to your podcast for a while now. I started with a couple more of the recent ones and decided to go back to the beginning, and I'm making my way forward. I've been continuously sober since August 17th of 1989, and from pretty early on, I've always listened to AA speakers and workshops. Of course, back then, it was all on cassette tapes. I hear you, Mike. I was listening to those cassette tapes as well. He says, anyway, I am in the present now listening to podcasts, and while I still love hearing workshops and speakers sharing experience, strength, and hope, I am definitely enjoying the format you have where you interview your guests. It's pretty refreshing and real. I heard on a couple of your earlier podcasts that you were interviewed on, I think it was the Bubble Hour, and so I went to that podcast, but I can't seem to find your story there. Can you help me with that? Maybe the date or episode. Anyway, keep up the good work, and know many of us in smaller rural areas are getting a lot out of your quote meeting between meetings. Take care, Mike C. from East Idaho. Well, Mike C. from East Idaho, for those, as I said when I responded to your email, if you're a glutton for punishment, here is my story, so to speak, on the Bubble Hour. I also gave him a link to where I shared my story on this here podcast on Sober Speak at one point back at the end of December. But Mike, it was good to hear from you. I really do appreciate it. And we have very similar sobriety dates, my friend. You're August 17th of 1989. And I'm actually May 29th of 1989. So we were in different parts of the world getting sober at the same time. Thanks for writing in, Mike. Appreciate you. Claire writes in, and Claire says, I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, working the 12 steps from the Big Book. I've been abstinent for about 11 months from my alcoholic foods and food behaviors that kept me in the disease of addiction for 45 years. It was hell. I would dip in and out of an alcoholic binge, drinking, which would lead to blackouts. I come from a long line of addicts, losing 2 brothers to their addiction of alcohol and drugs. My nan and several uncles were alcoholic. My dad just had all the isms. The Big Book saved my life. Although my main addiction is sugar, which was killing me slow physically, I was dead inside for years. I love the podcast. I definitely identify with the insanity of addiction in whatever form that takes. Thank you for your service and fellowship, Claire M. in the UK. Well, Claire M. in the UK, thanks for writing in, and I'm so glad that not just alcoholics listen to this thing. I get a lot of, and we've already had it here on listener feedback. I get a lot of messages from alcoholics. We've gotten them from, sex addicts. We've gotten them from Al-Anon, ACA, all over the map. And I appreciate you and your kind words. And I'm glad that we're able to give you a little bit of help, or just not help, but guidance and inspiration, hopefully. Thanks for writing in, Claire. Melissa writes in and she says, Hi, John. I am from Massachusetts. I just decided to finally quit drinking 13 days ago. Your podcasts are so helpful to me. I love listening to them on my way home from work. I ran a search on YouTube and found you. I have only heard about 3 or 4 of the episodes so far. Here is what I know so far about my recovery. I have not had any jackpots in my life. I was, and still am somewhat, an empty shell of a person and still have a lot of spiritual work to do. We all do, Melissa. She says, I want to quit drinking forever because life is so much better without alcohol, but I can't quit on my own. I am a weekend and periodic drinker. AA meetings are a part of my life now. These meetings fill my heart. Sometimes I wonder that other AAs will consider me not eligible for AA because my outward life looks so great. I'm a successful business owner, not I just built a new house and I have been with the same person for 34 years, no children. That's all for now. Thanks. And I hope you have an amazing day, Melissa. Well, Melissa, I hope you have an amazing day as well. But I think you'll find a lot of people in the rooms who can identify with you. In fact, it talks about it in the 12 and 12 people who, it says in the 12 and 12, talks about women in particular who, this thing starts late, and they don't have to go as far down. And so anyway, I would just suggest you keep going back to meetings and not be concerned about what other people are thinking about you in there. Kimberly writes in, last but not least, and Kimberly says, "Hi, John. I found Sober Speak on Spotify while searching for podcasts about recovery. I recently accepted a job that requires hours of driving from East Texas to DFW to West Texas. I've been inspired by the podcast and has created a desire to return to active participation in the program of AA, although I am sober. I am recently divorced and suddenly an empty nester. Life hurts sometimes, and I need a program besides just me and my higher power. I'm so thankful for the podcast. Thank you, Kimberly L." Well, Kimberly, it sounds like you're back on track. I'm glad for you, and thank you for writing in. I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of folks out there. All right, everybody, that is another episode of, what is this, Sober Speak in the can, as they say. I always end this with, keep coming back. It works if you work it. And may God bless you and keep you until then. We take this one samana at a time. I hope to be back next week. God bless you. Love you guys. Thanks for tuning in.